Thanks, Laura. Hi, everyone. I'm Danika Holmes, and I'm a hydrologist and water resource specialist for the DNRC out of Missoula's Regional Water Resources Office. And my job is to process and review in-stream flow water right change applications. But my background has been in studying the hydrological potential and socioeconomic and political implications of using natural water storage as an alternative approach to address our really uncertain water future. This is a burgeoning field of study. There are a lot of people who are becoming really interested in it. And I want to say I don't have a lot of time today to talk, but there are a lot of regulatory and planning considerations with this topic that I'm not going to be able to go into, but keep that in mind. So my goal today is to just provide a really brief introduction into a topic that has certainly informed the way I approach my work and how I feel about natural resource management in general. So we're here because there's a global consensus among leading climatologists that human activity is causing a less predictable and generally warmer climate. And for Montanans, this means a shift in the timing of runoff due to earlier snowmelt and increased precipitation as rain in the late winter and early spring months. Potential issues surrounding these projected shifts are compounded by booming populations, and there is concern that our existing infrastructure doesn't have the capacity to meet those future needs. I argue that many of the water availability issues that we have today are or can be attributed to the way that we actually think about water storage in general. And for us, water storage traditionally is viewed as built structures like concrete dams or earthen dams and reservoirs. And I'm certainly not saying that reservoirs are all bad or useless. In fact, they are really important in helping maintain manageable stream flows in rivers and river systems that provide a lot of uses for a lot of different people. But along those lines, reservoirs are constructed with people in mind primarily. And I think most of us could agree that we wouldn't have to worry about such an uncertain climate future if people weren't so self-centered. So I think if we're going to try to clean up or prevent whatever mess we already have at a global scale, we need to reconsider the way we talk about and manage competing water storage demands, and really start making it more about the non-human stakeholders in the equation. I know that's kind of a tricky topic in Montana. So what's natural water storage anyway, and what makes it an alternative approach? The World Resources Institute defines natural water storage as the strategic use of networks of working lands and landscapes and other open spaces to conserve ecosystem values and functions while providing ancillary benefits to people. In the context of water use in Montana, this definition highlights the retention of that rainwater and earlier snowmelt, and elongating the period of time that it's made available. The emphasis here is to extend the availability of water as a means of promoting ecological vitality first, but in a way that also benefits us. Examples of natural infrastructure include existing and restored natural systems like floodplains, riparian areas, and wetlands that act as sponges, basically, to absorb excess floodwater, slow high-velocity runoff, and promote groundwater recharge, and the slow re-release of water in the form of return flows later in the season when we need it most. People, of course, are already restoring wetlands and floodplains, but when reframed like this, I think that the storage component of these systems is brought to the forefront, and they can be seen as just another type of reservoir. So along with this definition, I like to add that the crux of this approach is reconceptualizing water storage and water infrastructures as the interplay between complex physical features, landscape dynamics, human water use, and the revolving suite of regulations and technological advances and human water use that influence the retention and re-release of water over time. So Laura kind of introduced this a little bit, but a great example of natural storage infrastructure in Montana, and increasingly the rest of the West, is beaver mimicry. And like the name implies, this process it involves creating deformable structures that mimic the services provided by beavers, which include the generation of riparian vegetation, the reduction of downstream sediment loads, and gravel substrate conditions that are otherwise unfavorable to native fish. And I will say my background and my introduction into this was in the Muscle River, so in the Muscle River Basin, so there are going to be a few pictures of the mussel shell in this talk. But in systems that have been urbanized or where beavers have been largely eradicated, streams tend to straighten or channelize, and this leads to the disconnection of streams and their floodplains, which discourages the emergence of these really valuable riparian ecosystem processes. In these systems, instead of water flooding out and onto the floodplains, floodplains are perched above incised streams due to continued downcutting, as you can see here. What results is the decreased residence time and volume of water in basins that historically may have had really thriving wetlands and beaver populations that contributed to those late season return flows when people and fish needed them the most. In systems where these issues aren't as prevalent, that earlier spring snowmelt is able to seasonally interact with floodplains in a way that makes them more liable to soak up and store and drain that water later on. Natural infrastructures have been shown to revive historic wetland and riparian ecosystems in a way that promotes aquifer recharge, more effective floodwater attenuation, and that late season water availability of earlier snowmelt and precipitation as rain in the winter that otherwise would flow right through an incised system. These structures are intended to be impermanent. They are by design inexpensive and easy to construct without expensive equipment in streams and creeks of all sizes, and they do prove to have long-term positive impacts in the systems where they're implemented. And I know it's, these systems aren't huge. It's unlikely that one is going to have basin-wide effects, but I do think that having a distributed network of these storage sites in basins, basins especially in Montana, does have the potential to increase basin resilience to late season drought and habitat degradation. So with all of that, how do we get these projects off the ground in a way to ensure that they're going to actually benefit people and non-human living things, which is important. I love this picture. I wish I could have had more pictures taken by Chris Boyer, but this is where I think that whole reconceptualizing the idea of what natural storage is comes into play. The literature is really clear, and I know that there are a lot of people in this room who can professionally and personally attest to the fact that large-scale restoration efforts like these are most successful when they are contextualized in a participatory framework that necessarily considers and includes and values the input of stakeholders in these basins who have an intimate understanding of the unique challenges that are faced by their special kind of water problems. Participatory, community-led conservation efforts are realized more effectively on the ground than projects that are undertaken without the inclusion of those stakeholder voices. I do think there's enough water to go around, and we have the tools to make that happen. In my work, I see new efforts to protect water in stream all the time, and in-stream water protection is integral to making sure that native fish have the riparian conditions that they need to survive late season. However, in the same way that reservoirs are constructed to address human water needs primarily, in-stream flows are also targeting a very specific stakeholder. And of course, there are people who benefit also economically from in-stream flow protection. But the trick here is is that there is still animosity towards conservation efforts, or towards efforts that really put a lot of emphasis on environmental water conservation. So I do think it's time we start putting more energy into exploring these inexpensive and easily deployable solutions that we already know have major impacts for many living things in dewatered systems. And I think it's easy to plan when you only have one or two stakeholders in mind. And planning for an increasingly uncertain future, especially in our state, I think is going to require really innovative ways in reframing how we view water as a resource and managing it. So with that, there is a lot more information. This was so brief, and I'm sure if there are any questions, you can feel free to find me afterwards. I love talking about this. There's a lot more, but I also wanted to include additional fantastic local resources just in our region for people who have done this work. They are actively working on making this a reality on the ground, and so from the hydrological perspective, the ecological perspective, and the social side of things. So I encourage you to reach out and get to know your local resources if you have any other questions. Thanks.